and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 9:30. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours following a fall in bookings due to Omicron. The operator of Real Greek and Francomanca restaurant chains say the rescue packages are needed regardless of whether new measures are put in place to try to reduce the spread of COVID. The government says support for businesses is kept under constant review. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. The Education Secretary has appealed for qualified teachers across the primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning. Extra funding to tackle coronavirus across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland has been doubled by Westminster. The total sum has now been increased to £860 million, with more than half of that going to Scotland. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says the boost is to ensure people in the devolved nations are supported during the health crisis. But Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, tweeted to say half of the allocated money was not new funding, but would go towards helping businesses in the region. In Australia, a sixth child has died following an incident in which a bouncy castle was lifted into the air by a sudden gust of wind. 11-year-old Chase Harrison died in hospital yesterday. 2 other children remain in a critical condition. One is recovering at home following the incident in Tasmania on Thursday. Children at the Hillcrest Primary School in Devonport were celebrating the end of the school year. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 10 o'clock.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's, and we've got a show full of today's big stories and lots of discussion as well, as usual, on the issues you care about. So here's what's coming up.
Well, ministers are reportedly resisting calls for new restrictions before Christmas Day, with Chancellor Rishi Sunak said to be among them. This comes as Health Secretary Sajid Javid says he can't rule out new COVID measures. Here we go, everyone. We'll be discussing the country's Christmas prospects and indeed the way they categorise these figures this morning.
Yes, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is due to take over responsibility for the UK's future relationship with the EU after Lord Frost, the Brexit minister, resigned. What does her appointment mean for the post-Brexit relationship with the EU? Well, we'll be talking about that.
She's busy, isn't she? Anyway, also on the show, The Guardian has released a photograph of the Prime Minister seemingly drinking with his wife and colleagues in the number 10 garden during the first national lockdown in May last year. I'm sure you've all seen this picture by now. Number 10 says it was a work meeting. We'll be talking about the Prime Minister's dwindling credibility when it comes to reinforcing COVID rules.
Yes, that's all coming up, as well as much more across the programme as well. We're here with you till midday, and you can get in touch with your views, as usual, on gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on potential Christmas restrictions and COVID modelling.
It's looking increasingly likely that there could be another lockdown, or at the very least, increased restrictions. The Prime Minister is reportedly weighing up 3 plans. So, advising against household mixing, limiting mixing, social distancing and issuing a hospitality curfew, or even declaring a full lockdown. So these decisions will be made based on modelling, projections and predictions provided by Sage. But there was a really fascinating exchange on Twitter yesterday between Fraser Nelson of The Spectator and Graham Medley, the chair of the Sage Modelling Committee and a professor at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Now, it was fascinating, but it was also really quite terrifying. London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine last weekend published a study on Omicron that was so pessimistic and gloomy that, ironically, it should have come with a health warning. Talk of 75,000 deaths, 500,000 hospitalisations. But JP Morgan then had a close look at this study and spotted something really, really big. These models all assume that Omicron is as deadly as Delta, which flies in the face, really, of what we currently know and based on what's coming out of South Africa at the moment. It found that if you adjust the modelling to account for that, then bed occupancy by COVID-19 patients at the end of January would be 33% of the peak seen in January 2021. And that, get this would be manageable without further restrictions. Manageable with no need for further restrictions. When pressed on why this hadn't been done, it was revealed by Professor Medley that essentially they only modelled bad outcomes that require restrictions, but not just as likely outcomes that would not require restrictions. And that brief may have been given to them by government. So, just to kind of crystallise all this, this implies a few things. A huge negativity bias within Sage, science blindly following instructions, but worse, potentially worse, the implication that this government is only keen on hearing worst-case scenarios and presenting them to the public. It's like they're looking for an excuse to impose restrictions in a lockdown. And there seems to be a big sense now that enough is enough. In fact, that's exactly what Steve Baker MP said when he booted Nadine Dorries out of a Tory WhatsApp group. I believe we can have a look at this now, actually. Let's take a look at this WhatsApp exchange. There you go. So there's the picture there. And you can see Steve Baker there saying, enough is enough, after he's booted her out. But anyway, but the people are also saying, aren't they, enough is enough. So, that's quite enough, that picture, there we go. Despite what's been reported, tens of thousands of people took to the streets of London, Bournemouth, Blackburn, Gloucestershire, Bristol, Glasgow, Cardiff, Belfast, and of course, lest we forget, the Isle of Wight over the weekend to protest. Now, this was not an anti-vax protest, as has been reported. There may have been anti-vaxxers there, I'm sure there were. But these demonstrations were more of a freedom march, really. Anti-restriction, yep. Anti-vaccine passport, yep. Anti-lockdown, definitely. Anti-tyranny. Well, not just exclusively anti-vax. Demonstrators also gathered outside Manchester City's Etihad Stadium to protest against vaccine safety and COVID-19 passes. It's pretty simple, isn't it, I think? It's starting to look as though this government is only considering worst-case scenarios. Our scientific community may be blindly modelling that for them. The vast majority of the media demonises anyone who speaks out against this as some kind of anti-vaxxer. But it's becoming increasingly obvious, I think, that this government had little to no regard for the rules that it was imposing on us. Here's that infamous picture now, I believe, of Boris Johnson and co. at a cheese and wine-infused business gathering. There we go. It's good, obviously, The Guardian have published that. It's not a great look, is it? Let's be perfectly honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a great look at all. Now, it's looking increasingly likely that this government has no moral authority, really, to impose additional restrictions upon us now, and that the science used to justify those restrictions is potentially quite blinkered, and that the public and political will to comply is now at an all-time low.
Lots to get stuck in on there. I think a lockdown is now inevitable,
Yeah, I think so.
and the reason
It shouldn't be, but I think it is.
It shouldn't be. Well, I mean,
totally.
look, my views on this have changed quite considerably over the last week or so. But I think the main reason it's now inevitable is because I was listening to the radio over the weekend, and in London, you have something like 1 in 3 staff absences in the NHS, gone up massively. And I know we keep hearing this idea of we shouldn't live to protect the NHS, the NHS should be there to protect us. But the reality is, if 1 in 3, staff in some London hospitals are absent, that is because they're isolating, because of having COVID, because of the transmissibility of Omicron, the increased transmissibility compared to Delta, then what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do when half of a third of the workforce...
I'm not sure how a lockdown would prevent more NHS staff from isolating, because they're in the hospitals, aren't they?
Yes, but it would. I suppose it would be to stop community transmission to other, because those people are in the community as well, and you have police off. It's not just the NHS; it's vital staff, isn't it? And I just think the government doesn't have much. They can't do much other than stop social distancing. And whether it won't be a full lockdown, it might be, going back to no indoor mixing, no household mixing, for example. I don't see how they can avoid any further restrictions anymore.
I think we were told when big scary Omicron first came out, and we were told, weren't we, that it would take about 3 weeks for us to have a much better handling on an idea, really, of how deadly it is, because that's what really matters, isn't it? The transmissibility is one thing, but, hospitalisations and deaths are really where it's at when it comes to lockdowns. Well, we're nearly there, aren't we? So I'm hoping that at some point this week we're going to have some pretty significant data drop that, fingers crossed, shows what we're seeing so far anyway out of South Africa, which is that, this thing is contagious, but actually it's not really killing people and it's not really putting people in hospital. So I hope that is actually put out.
I think the death toll, last time I looked at, this was yesterday, I think, was seven people have died with...
Yeah, exactly.
Debatable Omicron,
which makes it difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think for me it is true, because it's the transmissibility that is the worrying aspect. Because I think obviously if everybody's going to get it at some point, even if the death rate is incredibly low, it's still a lot of people, isn't it, in terms of raw numbers, and that's the problem. But let us know what you think. GBViews at GBNews.uk. Are you concerned about Omicron, or do you think it's all just going to be the same? And are you worried about the prospect of having to go through yet another lockdown? Let us know what you think about that as well, and about that not party, but gathering as well. Let us know.
I mean, just quickly before we do that, I was in. I went to just out for Saturday lunch. Went out for lunch to a little pub. And I got there about midday, so you would normally on a Saturday you'd expect that to be a busy time to start filling up, and because we enjoyed it so much, I decided to stay all evening as well. And I was still there for when normally the evening rush would come in. Throughout my entire time in that pub restaurant, not a single person sat in that restaurant. It's basically like everyone's staying at home completely, pretty much.
Yeah, well, people don't want to cancel their Christmases.
People don't want to get it. People are afraid of testing positive, aren't they?
Absolutely. Well, after the break, we'll be talking more about those potential Christmas restrictions as pressure mounts on the Prime Minister, and we'll be looking at how the current COVID restrictions are affecting businesses as well, especially hospitality, as Patrick was saying, as we head into Christmas, of course. So stay with us.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Right. Well, anyway, ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new measures to tackle the Omicron variant before Christmas.
Yes, according to The Times, around one-third of the Cabinet are reluctant to support new restrictions in the coming days, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Rishi Sunak among them.
So this comes after Health Secretary Sajid Javid refused to rule out further COVID restrictions for England as Omicron cases continue to soar. Nearly 83,000 COVID cases were reported yesterday after a week of record highs.
Yes, while speaking this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab was asked whether or not there will be further restrictions before Christmas. And Mr Raab replied by saying that evidence is being reviewed on an hour-by-hour basis, but that the public should use common sense judgment on who they're mixing with.
Yes, well, let's talk now to Matthew Lesh, Head of Research at the Adam Smith Institute, a neoliberal think tank and educational group. Good morning. Happy Monday to you. I take it you weren't out and about this weekend then, were you?
I was not out and about. In fact, I'm at home isolating at the moment
with
the dreaded Omicron variant.
Are you feeling okay?
I'm feeling much better today. A few days of headache and fatigue got me down, but I get up again.
Yes, someone should write a song about that, shouldn't they? So what do you make of the potential for more restrictions going into Christmas, over Christmas, maybe just after Christmas, based on where we are now with this variant?
Look, I think I'm pretty angry. I think a lot of people are pretty angry about the prospect of putting themselves into another lockdown. We were told in July this was it. We were going to learn to live with COVID. We've got vaccines, we've got antivirals, we've got all sorts of other treatments we can use to tackle the virus. We have a new variant. Yes, there's a large number of cases, but what we know from South Africa, from all the published information, is that is not leading to the severity of virus we've seen previously. It's leading to far fewer hospitalizations. When people are in hospital, they're spending less time in hospital, and there's a lot fewer going into ICU and onto ventilators. So I just don't think the case has been made for the need for more restrictions. At the same time, if people want to take responsibility for themselves, if they want to minimize their social interactions, but I think a lot of people are already doing in the run up to Christmas, all power to them. But I think the era of mass restrictions very much should have already come to an end. And I'm extremely disappointed that the government is, by all reports, going down that track today.
And it's one thing the government sort of bring that into force, isn't it? And it's another thing trying to actually enforce it and trying to get the public to comply. Again, this morning we showed our viewers the pictures there. The Prime Minister's on the front page of The Guardian and other newspapers because he had this business meeting / garden gathering with several other people during the lockdown. Do you think all these things, the parties, these pictures coming out, they're going to affect compliance this time round? Because a lot of people will say, well, why should I listen to Boris Johnson when he's not even following the rules?
Yeah, look, if Boris Johnson can't even follow the rules in May 2020, when we were probably in the heart of a lockdown and some of the worst death tolls imaginable, then what responsibility do people have? What are the chances people are going to follow new restrictions at the end of 2021 and the start of 2022? I think there is going to be a lot less compliance, whether it's because of Boris or just because people have had enough of all this. People feel like they want to take their own life, their own hands. They don't want another lockdown. Now, of course, I don't know how many pubs and restaurants are going to open in contradiction of the rules, but I think you're going to see a lot more socialising than you did during previous lockdowns, a lot more non-compliance. We have to ask ourselves, in the past, there was a good justification for lockdowns. Maybe you disagree with it, but there was a good justification in the first lockdown. Let's not overwhelm the NHS. The second lockdown, similar justification. We also were told we're waiting for the vaccines. We're waiting for them, enough people, particularly the vulnerable, to get vaccinated. This time around, there doesn't seem to be a clear logic or justification or endpoint to new restrictions. If there's new restrictions, once they go, the COVID will again spread through the population. So all you're doing is slightly slowing the spread. You're actually not stopping it or achieving very much in the process. So people aren't going to see a reason to follow the restrictions, and you're going to have a lot less compliance and a lot less effectiveness as a result.
Yeah, I'm assuming that you may have had a chance to have a look at the interaction, I think we could call it, between Fraser Nelson and the chap from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Graham Medley, where it did appear to suggest, anyway, that they were only really interested in modelling for SAGE and the government based around worst-case scenarios, and they hadn't actually even considered implementing a study that might show that Omicron is less virulent and less dangerous and less deadly than Delta. How do you feel about that? That does imply a few certain things, doesn't it, I think?
I mean, it fundamentally implies a corruption of the scientific process. The scientists are meant to model scenarios, various scenarios about what could happen with the virus. And the response we saw from the head of SPI, the head of the SAGE subgroup responsible for modelling, was we're not interested in modelling scenarios that don't need government response, that don't require decision. In fact, you would very clearly argue in indecision, choosing not to act, choosing not to lock people down is a decision. And the scientists should be presenting all sorts of different scenarios based upon the best possible evidence. What they've instead appeared to be doing is saying, we're going to provide the most optimistic view. We're going to provide a view in which Omicron is as deadly as Delta, despite the fact that we know from all evidence it's very likely to be as deadly as Delta because we have pre-existing immunity, because it might potentially be less deadly in and of itself. But what they're going to do is they're going to provide the most negative scenarios, and then they're going to step back and say, oh, it's not our responsibility for what happened next. We're going to leave that to the politicians to decide. The problem is, every single time they put out these scenarios, it's effectively taken by the media as predictions of things that's going to happen. And the government takes action on it because they've got this extraordinary pressure building up. And then the scientists step back and say, well, that didn't happen because you took all this action. I mean, there's completely failure to do the most basic thing you would expect in modelling. If this was the private sector, all these people would be sacked by now because their models never come true. The companies they work for would have lost millions and millions of pounds because the models aren't there, because the models aren't speaking to any kind of meaningful reality. I want to see the government very much have a red team approach to this, where there are alternative models, where people are putting forward different approaches, different questioning all the assumptions being made, and we were actually making decisions based upon the costs and benefits. The other interesting part of that exchange was, from that particular professor, Medley, was the fact that he said that he just assumes someone else in government is also considering the costs of lockdown itself. That there's another modelling team doing the cost-benefit. There isn't. We know there is no proper cost-benefit analysis on all this kind of modelling and lockdown. And as long as that's going on, I think we've got to really question why the government is relying on this very one-sided, very doomster, gloomster view in order to take away our most fundamental liberties and rights and cause so much economic damage.
Well, Matthew Lesh, thank you so much for all your input on that issue, Head of Research at the Adam Smith Institute. I think, while we haven't seen, have we really, a cost-benefit analysis of the impact of lockdown? We haven't at all, and I think it's wishful thinking at this point to expect that the government will do that, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to delve into the inbox now, gbviews at gbnews.uk. It's interesting, isn't it? Given that the government and the scientists have been telling us how transmissible this variant is, surely it will spread again after any lockdown. That's from Matthew. Cracking point, Matthew. In fact, there's another Matthew that we've just had on made a similar point to that. It's all very well and good locking us down now, but as soon as you release us, it's going to crack on again,
it's about that delay, isn't it? Because that's what in the beginning of the pandemic, it was about delaying until everybody gets their first jab, and now I suppose it's about delaying until everybody gets their booster jab.
Yes, Bob has been in touch. I'm curious why you are not reporting that Steve Baker cancelled Nadine Dorries. I did right at the start. It was in my points at the top of that. But it's interesting. I'm glad you brought it up, because it's worth noting that it really does point towards the fact that actually, even amongst government figures now, they're not afraid to say enough is enough, which is literally what he did.
Indeed. Well, Keep all your thoughts coming into us, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and we will be back after this short break with more of your views and plenty more stories.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Yes, well, now it's time for your weather with meteorologist Patrick Christys. Looking ahead to today's weather in the UK is looking cloudy for many once again, though some breaks are possible in the east. Let's take a look at the details now, shall we? In the southwest of England, largely cloudy skies across the southwest England this morning, with fewer breaks in the cloud expected today than yesterday. A breezy morning along the English Channel coast, highs of around 9 Celsius. If we go to southeast England now, across the southeast England, rather cloudy through a chance of some bright spells later this morning. Light winds with a high of around 8 Celsius, and we're going over to Wales now, ladies and gentlemen. So a widely cloudy day across Wales with limited brightness, a chance of the odd bright spell and to the west and on the high ground later on. And in the Midlands, across the Midlands, after a generally cloudy start this morning, there is a chance of some bright or sunny spells, particularly in the east later on, staying dry though, with light winds. And if we go now to the northeast, crossing the Pennines to northeast England, and there is a greater chance of seeing some bright or sunny spells here today. Though there will still be plenty of cloud around, particularly this morning. We're going north of the border now to the south of Scotland. Patchy rain and drizzle will push southwestwards across southern Scotland at first. It will then be a mostly dry but rather cloudy morning with just a few isolated bright spells. And if we shuffle over now to Northern Ireland, heading across to Northern Ireland, the cloudy theme continues. There is a chance of some bright or sunny spells developing later on this morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everyone. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Mureki, and we're here all the way through until midday with a show full of all of those biggest stories and lots of top discussion topics as well.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on our email, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll get to those throughout the show. But first, it's time for the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 10 o'clock. Ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, is urging for tightened restrictions to prevent the health service being overwhelmed. The Chancellor has announced funding to tackle COVID in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and that it's been increased to £860 million. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours, following a fall in bookings due to Omicron. The operator of the Real Greek and Franco Manca restaurant chains say rescue packages are needed regardless of whether new measures are in place to reduce the spread of COVID. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Nighttime Industries Association, Michael Kill, told GB News the new restrictions are confusing, with businesses encouraged to stay open, but customers told to stay away.
We're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods. People that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, but which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
Meanwhile, Labour is also calling for greater support for businesses through the festive period. They're asking for the reintroduction of sick pay for employees who've tested positive with COVID or have to self-isolate with symptoms.
What you don't want in a situation like this is businesses and workers having to calculate, should we do the right thing here or is there a cost to us? So it's really important that we've got a good sick pay system in place and one that is also helpful to the small businesses involved.
Boris Johnson is set to face fresh questions over alleged gatherings held at Downing Street during lockdown restrictions after a photograph emerged of him, his wife and several staff in the number 10 garden in May of 2020. Well, The Guardian released this photograph. It shows the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and two others during the first national lockdown. 16 other staff members can be seen outside of that photograph, but nearby. A Downing Street spokesperson told GB News work meetings often take place in the Downing Street garden in the summer months. On this occasion, there were staff meetings following a number 10 press conference. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to try to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. The Education Secretary has appealed for qualified teachers across primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning, but Naheem Zahawi says signing up for even one day a week would help maintain face-to-face teaching. In other news, in Australia, a sixth child has died following an incident in which a bouncy castle was lifted into the air by a sudden gust of wind. 11-year-old Chase Harrison died in hospital yesterday. Two other children remain in a critical condition. One is recovering at home following the incident in Tasmania on Thursday. Children at the Hillcrest Primary School in Devonport were celebrating the end of the school year. The Women's Tennis Association say an appearance on Sunday by the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai did not address its concerns about her well-being. Speaking to the press on camera in public for the first time yesterday, Peng said she had never accused anyone of sexually assaulting her. She also said that a social media post she shared early last month has been misunderstood. Her well-being became a matter of concern after she accused a government official of sexually assaulting her. After that social media post, she was absent from public view for nearly 3 weeks. US Open champion Emma Raducanu has won the BBC's Sports Personality of the Year. The 19-year-old became the first qualifier ever to win a Grand Slam tennis tournament. She's also the first British woman since Virginia Wade in 1977 to win a Grand Slam. She took home the top prize ahead of Olympic gold medalists Tom Daley and Adam Peaty. You're right up to date. I'll have more for you at 10:30. For now, it's back to the point.
Good morning, everyone. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Moroki. We've got a show full of all of today's biggest topics to really get you going. So here's what's on the menu.
Yes, ministers are reportedly resisting calls for new restrictions before December the 25th, with Chancellor Rishi Sunak said to be among them. This comes as Health Secretary Sajid Javid says he can't rule out new COVID measures.
Yes, indeed. And The Guardian has released this now infamous photograph, which I think a lot of you are very tired of seeing. But anyway, of the Prime Minister seemingly drinking with his wife and colleagues in the Number 10 garden during the first national lockdown in May last year. Number 10 says it was a work meeting. We'll be discussing whether the Prime Minister now has any credibility left when it comes to leading the country through COVID.
Yes, and almost 1,200 individuals have crossed the channel in the past 4 days as smugglers took advantage of the calmer weather conditions. We'll be joined by our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, for the latest on that.
Yes, we have all of that coming and much, much more across the programme. You can get in touch, as always, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But first, Mercy gives her views on the cancellation of J.K. Rowling.
The organisers of Real Life Quidditch have announced they'll be changing the name of the sport to distance themselves from J.K. Rowling, who literally invented the game in her Harry Potter book series. Quidditch, for those that don't know, is a fast-paced contact sport played in over 30 countries, where players, in Harry Potter fashion, have to keep a broom between their legs at all times. Yes, really. A joint statement by US Quidditch and Major League Quidditch said that the organisers will be distancing themselves from the works of J.K. Rowling because of her, quote, anti-trans positions. The leagues add themselves to a growing list of people who want to profit off the genius of J.K. Rowling, whilst cowardly shirking any attempt to have a full conversation about trans rights and the protection of biological women, to listen to women. Warner Brothers, for instance, virtually erased Rowling's name from the trailer of an upcoming Harry Potter spin-off, a spin-off she wrote. And she's been widely denounced as a transphobe by vacuous Hollywood celebs, including much of the Harry Potter cast, although credit to Robbie Coltrane, who plays Hagrid, for defending Rowling's right to voice her opinion. The reaction to J.K. Rowling has been everything from disproportionate to downright disturbing. When one of the most celebrated filmmakers in the world, Roman Polanski, was convicted of drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl, Hollywood did not cancel him. In fact, the convicted child rapist went on to win BAFTAs and Golden Globes. The world's biggest stars like Johnny Depp, Ewan McGregor and Kate Winslet were still lining up to put their names to his films. Kate Winslet, when asked how she felt working with someone convicted of a child sex crime, said, quote, "You put it to one side and you just work with the person." Contrast that to how J.K. Rowling has been treated for merely expressing concern about how the trans rights debate is currently playing out. For those that have not followed the twists and turns of Rowling's story so far, her views are basically this. Firstly, she's worried that women, as she says, are being told to shut up and sit down when they express their views about gender and the trans movement. Secondly, she's concerned with a huge rise in kids being referred to gender clinics. She cites an over 4,400% rise in girls in the UK being referred to trans clinics. She's also concerned that women are basically being reduced to sexless androids, like people with vulvas, and having their biological realities denied. And she's critical of the fact we're endangering women by distorting reality. Scottish police, for instance, will be recording rapes by men who identify as women as rapes by women. These are perfectly reasonable concerns. I see that, and I believe the majority of people in the country see that too.
I mean, this is just bonkers from start to finish. So, just so I'm correct now on this. So, losers who run around with a fake broomstick between their leg, chasing something called the snitch, which as far as I can see is maybe just going to be a person painted yellow, and wear hoodies with Harry Potter houses on their backs, and pretend to be wizards as adults.
Yeah.
Now have the moral authority over J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Right, I just wondered if that was the case.
Not only that, which is, you know, it is funny. But what's not funny, I think, is that these are the people who think that somehow my views as a woman, yes, I am critical in similar ways to J.K. Rowling of how the trans debate is playing out. they think they have the moral authority to tell me what womanhood is, and that's my problem. My problem isn't that people think the way they do. They're allowed to have their opinion. I want people to have their opinion. And of course, transgender people should have rights, but then there does need to be a conversation, which people don't want to have, about to what extent giving trans women rights, to what extent that encroaches upon the rights that biological women should have. So, and it plays out, for example, when it comes to things like women's prisons, for example. Do I have a right as a biological woman, should I ever end up in prison, to refuse to be housed with a trans woman who's a man? Do I have that? These are the questions we should be having.
We'd think so, yeah.
Well, exactly, and I just think silencing J.K. Rowling and any other woman who's critical of this is absolutely not the answer, and it's becoming very ridiculous.
Well, it is becoming ridiculous as well, because it's allowing men to define what womanhood is. It is removing a lot of female identity, of course, and diminishing that as well. But I do also find it ridiculous that people like Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, is that right? Are coming out and not backing J.K. Rowling. Daniel Radcliffe would be stacking shelves in Lidl if it wasn't for J.K. Rowling coming up with Harry Potter. He looks a bit like Harry Potter did as a child, and that's why he's now a multi-millionaire, and I think he should be very grateful for that, personally.
He looks like he is Harry Potter.
Yeah, but that's why he got the role, isn't it? That's why he got the role. He looked a bit like the drawings of Harry Potter as a child. He certainly didn't get it for his acting, did he?
Yeah, I mean, look, his lack of a, let's say, acting career post Harry Potter says.
Well, he just was in Equus for a while, which was a
I mean, I think he was in The Woman in
involved in getting naked from the waist down every night.
Yeah, so let us know what you think. GBViews at GBnews.uk. There is a serious, point in all of this, of course, but I just think we need to have the conversation about it. But get in touch with your views, GBViews at GBnews.uk.
Yes, exactly. Well, the person who delivers you the briefing with Tom Harwood is with us very, very shortly. Ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new measures to tackle the Omicron variant before Christmas. So, according to The Times, around 1/3 of the Cabinet are reluctant to support new restrictions in the coming days, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Rishi Sunak amongst them.
Yes, this comes after Health Secretary Sajid Javid refused to rule out further COVID restrictions for England as Omicron cases continue to soar. Nearly 83,000 COVID cases were reported yesterday after a week of record highs.
Well, speaking this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, was asked whether or not there will be further restrictions before Christmas, and Mr Raab replied by saying that evidence is being reviewed on an hour-by-hour basis, but the public should use common sense and judgment on who they are mixing with. Well, we've decided to use our common sense and judgment now to mix with Tom Harwood, who's in the studio with us there. There he is. You can't keep him off the telly. To find out what's been really going on in Downing Street and what the plans are, of course, Lord Frost resigned as well. What do you make of that to begin with?
Well, firstly, I have to say it's just about the most sensible thing you can do to mix with me. I'm just about the most immune person in Britain, having just recovered from COVID last week. But no, this is a serious point here because, of course, it was just a week ago that 100 Conservative MPs rebelled against their own party leadership on the measure of vaccine passports being brought in for large events and for nightclubs. Now, if that was the bar for vaccine passports for those sort of events, what more onerous restrictions may well incite in terms of rebellion could be even more significant. And that is a very precarious position for the Prime Minister to find himself in. I think that even if all the scientists were saying that they want this sort of circuit breaker lockdown to come in around Christmas, I don't think there's the political will to get it there. It would be a bit of a kamikaze move for this Prime Minister to try and deliver it. That being said, there are a number of different options that are currently being weighed up by the Prime Minister. According to the Telegraph this morning, there are 3 different main paths that could be taken. The first is fresh advice on how people should be behaving over Christmas, maybe when they should be seeing older members of the family, and maybe advice to people who previously shielded. The second strand of opinion is potentially reintroducing social distancing. There's talk of an 8 p.m. curfew for hospitality. There's talk of some of these more formal restrictions. And then the third pathway is that so-called circuit breaker lockdown, a full lockdown, something that people thought very much was in the past. Now, these are the 3 different options that the Telegraph is saying the Prime Minister is weighing up. I have to say those second two, those that involve formal legal restrictions that would need to be backed up by law, that may well need Parliament to be recalled, to be voted upon, those would be very, very hard to justify.
I think they probably would be, wouldn't they, really? I mean, it seems strange as well, because we all know that COVID can't come into a pub before 8 p.m. I mean, there's no possible way that it could possibly...
Well, this is the ridiculous thing about a curfew,
Yeah.
and I think we saw this around this time last year when we had this sort of tiering system and the 10 p.m. curfew. And what did we see at 10 p.m. every night in central London? People all pouring out at the same time onto the same more crowded transport networks than otherwise there would have been. Really quite counterproductive policy in many aspects.
Yeah, and you talked about the political will there. What about the willpower of the public at the moment in terms of compliance? Because we've seen those pictures on front pages of the papers this morning of Boris Johnson seen to be yet again flouting the rules. What... will he be Prime Minister this time next year, do you think? Because his credibility is getting chipped away day by day, it would seem.
He is certainly in an incredibly perilous position right now, probably the most perilous position than he has been at any time since he became Prime Minister. And remember, he became Prime Minister at a time when the Tories were nudging around fourth place in the polls, when he was running a minority government, and there was touch and go Brexit defeats, all that sort of torrid time from the summer to December 2019. Even including all of that, I think we're in a more perilous position for Boris Johnson now. The sharks are circling, and whereas before, in those times where he had defeats, where he had opposition, he had a strong group of supporters around him who believed in him to deliver Brexit. Well, most people believe that Brexit has been delivered.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big sort of tick. That's done. That's in the past. What happens next is the question. What is Boris Johnson's ideology? What is his mission? What is he for?
Yeah.
And that's a question that, as long as he can't answer, he's in a very difficult position.
And there's always going to be a bit of dissent from the backbenchers, of course, that's only natural. But what we saw with these WhatsApp messages with Steve Baker, Andrew Bridgen chipped in a bit as well, didn't he? And booting Nadine Dorries out of the WhatsApp. I believe we might be able to just show a clip. There we are, look at that. So I think you can see on the screen there, Steve Baker removed Nadine Dorries.
Yeah,
Enough is enough.
This was after, so the people prior to what we can see on screen there, people were sort of, these were backbench MPs in the Conservative Party. They were essentially saying, you know, we can't have more. They were criticising further lockdown restrictions. Nadine Dorries, Nadine Dorries sort of popped up there to defend the Prime Minister and obviously got swiftly booted out.
Yes,
got guillotined.
This was in the wake of the news of David Frost's resignation, Lord Frost's resignation from the Cabinet. And this is a group called Clean Global Brexit. Just over 100 Tory MPs in there on the Brexiteer side of the party, clearly expressing a lot of frustration with what was going on and what the sort of leadership of the Tory party was delivering. Nadine Dorries, of course, of that wing of the party, but recently promoted to Cabinet, feeling a great deal of loyalty towards the Prime Minister on a personal level and saying, actually, give the guy a break, he won that election. Clearly, that no longer cuts the mustard. We're now 2 years after that general election, albeit seismic general election, no doubt in large part delivered by Boris Johnson personally. But the question is, what on earth is the point of an 80-seat majority if you don't use that majority to do anything? And I think a lot of Conservative MPs and Conservative supporters throughout the country are deeply frustrated that there's been this Thatcher-scale victory, but without the Thatcher-scale reform, without the Thatcher-scale policy and wins and changes that people want to see in the country, it's almost as if a government was elected with a majority of just 1 or 2 seats, given how little they've actually done to change the country.
Tom, thank you very, very much. Tom Harwood there, obviously our political correspondent and the most immune man in Britain now from the coronavirus as well. So that's fantastic stuff. Well, look, after the break, we'll be joined by the one and only Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, in the studio as well, about the latest Channel crossings. But first, it's time for the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's simply more of the same for many of us today. Cloudy again across large parts of the country. Something a little brighter in the east as the cloud lifts, and somewhat breezy in the southwest on the edge of this area of high pressure where the isobars are a little closer together. Now this cold front, barely noticeable on the map there, will introduce some slightly drier air and higher cloud bases, I think, through the afternoon across parts of eastern Scotland into eastern England. And that will, although keeping things cloudy, turn things a little brighter into the afternoon, whilst low cloud sits further west, covering the hills, bringing a few spots of drizzle. There will be some broken cloud, West Wales, western parts of England, western Scotland. Some sunshine coming through here. A breezy afternoon to come in the far southwest. I'm feeling a little on the cold side, but temperatures not far from average for the time of year. Into the evening and overnight, as that higher cloud drifts west, there will be some breaks developing, especially in the west and through central parts. And where that happens, we'll see a touch of frost, temperatures dipping 0 to -2 Celsius. Otherwise, low single figures to start things off on Tuesday. Again, a lot of cloud covering the map, but I think a better chance through the day of some cloud breaks, especially for parts of Wales into central, western England, and where we see some cloud breaks, some decent sunny spells emerging. So for a lucky few, a sunny day, but for many, another cloudy day, and a bit colder again, temperatures of 4 to 6 Celsius, and still rather breezy towards the far southwest. Outbreaks of rain or drizzle affecting the far north and northwest of Scotland, staying fairly damp here through Tuesday. But for the vast majority of the UK, it is a dry day, albeit rather cloudy. That's set to change on Wednesday. Areas of rain move north across the country, turning to snow over northern hills later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Good morning. Now, almost 1,200 migrants have crossed the channel in the past 4 days as criminal gangs smuggle people and take advantage of calm seas and deep fog. It takes the total number of migrants crossing this year to 27,806, more than triple last year's then record number figure of 8,420.
Well, we're joined now by GB News' very own home and security editor, the one and only Mark White. So, Mark, the state of play there is that actually they're still coming thick and fast.
Yeah, and we've got a window where the weather is not too bad, actually, all the way up till Christmas. So we can expect that the boats are going to continue to come over Christmas. I was there last week, actually, when this window opened up because there was 10 days where the weather conditions were really quite appalling. So the boats couldn't make it across. And of course, they're piling up then on the other side of the channel, waiting for the people smugglers to be able to get them across. So we went down on Wednesday. We were there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And yeah, as predicted, the boats kept coming. Here's a flavour of just what I saw on Friday. It's incredible to think we're more than halfway through the month of December now, and still these small boats are coming across the English Channel. Throughout this morning, Border Force and RNLI lifeboats have been involved in intercepting numerous small boats in the channel. Here, one of the Border Force vessels now returning to the port of Dover. Effectively, what they do is they head up and down the channel to different incidents, responding, taking the migrants on shore. You can see migrants at the front of the Border Force vessel as it comes in. This is the Border Force vessel Alert. Some migrants at the back of this vessel as well. They have achieved what they set out to achieve, of course, which is to be picked up by UK authorities and taken here to Dover to be entered into the UK asylum system. So that was Friday, and they kept coming on Saturday and yesterday as well. Today, it's a little bit rougher out there, so probably not as many expected to come across today. Although, because they are using bigger boats now, purpose-built, this is how sophisticated the people smugglers are becoming. They are, we understand through Chinese companies, getting these boats purpose-built. They're then shipped to Turkey and then transported via road to Europe through to France, where they're assembled and then put across the channel. They're a bit bigger. Most of them now have sort of upturned bow, which then allows them on slightly rougher seas to be able to continue crossing. And that
see one there,
boat that's being pushed out there has got an upturned bow there. And you can see how they're just absolutely packed onto that boat. No room to get another single body on there. And crossing the channel, it doesn't take much for the boat to be swamped, for the boat to give away at the seams, as appears to have happened last month when 27 migrants lost their lives, part of the wreckage from that boat on the beach there, the outboard motor. And that's a real concern. There is going to be no let-up now, it's clear, in the number of migrants trying to get across, even when the weather is not ideal. And, you know, with so many on the boats, there's real concern that we may see another tragedy.
Yeah, you talk about that tragedy from last month, and at the time it did seem that that could be a catalyst to get something going and get some action on the part of Home Secretary Priti Patel and her French counterparts. Has there been any movement at all since then?
No, I mean, and to be honest, I didn't think there would be, because, you know, within hours of this tragedy unfolding, we had finger pointing from both sides, the French and the British, accusing each other of not doing enough to get a grip of the situation. Then you had that an edifying spectacle of the French President Emmanuel Macron slapping down our Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his offer to give them Border Force and other security personnel to help bolster their patrols on the beaches of northwestern France as a way of stopping the boats getting into the water in the first place. Because that's got to be the aim at the end of the day. Once they're in the water, there's very little you can do. If they don't want to be boarded, you risk then capsizing the boat, tossing people into the water, So once they get off the beaches, then it's very difficult to stop them. It's stopping them getting off the beaches you need to do. Well, Emmanuel Macron said, no thanks, we can handle, we'll bolster our own security.
Yeah,
look at what's happening. You know, they're still coming across.
He's not doing anything in presumably about these lorryfuls of boats that are actually coming into there and dropping them off. I mean, that could be another way of stopping this, couldn't it?
Well, certainly the authorities are trying to investigate and go to the source of where these boats are being manufactured. Just at the end of last week, the National Crime Agency put out a bulletin to the maritime industry warning them about these boats, and they're asking people involved in the maritime industry throughout Europe to be on the lookout for the kind of components and orders that would raise suspicions. So, you know, bulk orders for life jackets, that kind of thing. Components that, according to the National Crime Agency, these boats have no commercial purpose because of the way they're constructed, and they're just not safe enough. So their only role would be to smuggle people across the channel. And as I say, they're asking people within the maritime industry to be on the lookout for anything suspicious and to alert the authorities. But the convictions for this are few and far between at the moment.
Mark, thank you very much. As always, Mark White there, our home and security editor. Now, after the break, how are the current restrictions affecting the hospitality sector? We'll be hearing from our Scotland reporter, Davy Donaldson, about that. Anecdotally, I was in a completely empty pub over the weekend, although some kind soul did email in to suggest that maybe no one else came in because they saw me in there. But anyway, before that, let's take a look at this morning's news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new restrictions to be imposed before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, though, is urging for tightened rules to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours after a fall in bookings because of the Omicron variant. The operator of the Real Greek and Francomanca restaurant chains say rescue packages are needed regardless of whether there are new measures introduced. The government says support for businesses is being kept under constant review. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning, but the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across the primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms to try to maintain face-to-face teaching. In other news, US Open champion Emma Adakanu has won the BBC Sports Personality of the Year award. The 19-year-old became the first qualifier ever to win a Grand Slam tennis tournament. She's also the first British woman since Virginia Wade in 1977 to win a Grand Slam. She took home the top prize ahead of Olympic gold medalists Tom Daley and Adam Peaty. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 11 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, morning everybody. Now, it's estimated the cancellation of bookings in Scotland could cost the hospitality sector over £1 billion. Now, it comes as new restrictions came into force to ensure social distancing and advice not to go out by the Scottish Government. Our reporter in Scotland, David Donaldson, has more.
Empty seats in venues, a sight that is being replicated across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. The Linlithgow Rose Social Club has had to cancel 3 sold-out evenings between now and Hogmanay due to the rules regarding social distancing. How much do you reckon this cost the club?
We're certainly way in 5 figures. Way in 5 figures.
I mean, that is a huge, huge loss, for especially for an organisation like this.
Yes, especially at this time of the year where, and obviously everything that's went on with the 2 previous lockdowns, it's very, very disappointing.
How difficult is it to continue, or is that just something you can't think about at the moment?
Going forward, we have various things. There's already been a birthday party cancelled the first week in January for the same reasons, and we're not confident of things taking place after that.
A few miles away, the Corby Inn in Bo'ness has seen bookings cancelled, which means a loss of revenue during the busiest time of the year.
Well, so far, as over the last couple of days, we've had, since the advisory to stop mixing, we've had 120 cancellations so far to date. So our rules have never changed. So we've just, since the whole pandemic, we just followed the whole rules and we haven't changed them or relaxed them in any way because we try to protect ourselves as well as our customers.
The Linlithgow Rose Social Club have been ringing hundreds of people back due to cancelling their festive nights. They were hoping to make some money after a tough couple of years and believe others are also affected.
The £37 included money that was going to be made for the social club, much needed revenue, especially with everything that's been going on. And obviously it's been the knock-on effect by caterers, cabaret artists and everybody that's been affected by this. And plus obviously ourselves with the amount of money it would be taken over the bar.
A lot of businesses in the hospitality sector are clearly feeling the pinch as the Omicron virus spreads quickly. And with First Minister Nicola Sturgeon advising people not to go out before Christmas, it's another huge loss in revenue.
There you go, Dave Donaldson there reporting to us from Scotland. I really do think that if people do cancel and it's not as a result of government advice, if they just have made a decision to cancel, then actually they should pay for, a bit of what they would have had or something instead.
Yeah, I suppose. I think people should pay if they cancel too late anyway, under ordinary circumstances. But I think if people don't want to get sick, it's not their fault in a way.
No, but
I completely understand why people are having to make or choosing to make those cancellations because they don't want to have to be self-isolating during the Christmas period. So I get it. But I also think the reason why the government isn't telling people to stay away is because if they did tell people to stay away, it would be a policy, wouldn't it? And then they would pretty much have to sort of reimburse or support those businesses.
Let the public harm the pubs and the hospitality sector, and then
using us as scapegoats, basically.
Using the public as scapegoats for the desecration of our hospitality sector. Anyway, Chancellor Rishi Sunak has faced intense pressure to bring in emergency support measures for the hospitality and tourism industry, as we've been hearing. The Prime Minister's warning to be cautious over the festive period, as well as Professor Chris Whitty is called to limit socialising. This has meant that many businesses are missing the crucial Christmas trade boost.
Yes, it's been reported that the Chancellor is considering a VAT cut and cash boost to help our struggling pubs and restaurants. And earlier on the Great British Breakfast here on GB News, Rosie spoke to Michael Kill, CEO of the Nighttime Industries, about whether or not throwing cash at businesses is the way to combat these losses. Rosie and Simon, I should say.
Culmination of mixed messaging, The new restrictions have had a huge impact on trade. Many people closing early, and there's huge concern for our sector and a real sort of now a real drive for the Chancellor to step up and support an industry which has really is placed in a pseudo lockdown. I mean, as was suggested by your previous guests, we're in a position where it's almost like the government is saying you can stay open, but they've actually told our customers not to come. It's a terrible situation for everybody. We've seen that in Wales and Scotland, where people are really unsure of the rules, what the expectation is. So in England, it's the same. We're going through this bedding in process, but I think a lot of people, the combination between mixed messaging from government and restrictions, as you say, in nightclubs, the additional COVID pass or negative test on entry has really deterred people from coming. And we've seen a drop-off in terms of trade for no-shows, in terms of tickets for gigs, but we've also seen a downturn in trade for nightclubs. And that's obviously going to have a resonating impact on trade for this month, which they rely on so heavily to survive 2022 early doors. Age groups, as you would appreciate, some of the youngsters are probably going out a little bit more readily. Some of the older age groups are a little bit more reticent about going out because of their commitments to family over Christmas, as most have said. But I think the interesting part is some of the cities, the major cities, are being challenged with footfall in particular. Some of the suburb cities are doing okay, but everyone right the way across the board is quite a way down on sort of trading expectations. So, hugely difficult for everybody out there.
Is there a sense that the hospitality industry is being thrown under the bus here?
We've said many times on our sort of press statements that we do feel that we're being sacrificed. There are questions on evidence, as you can appreciate. As you can understand, the COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, but which we know full well are, highly transmissible. And that sort of is counterproductive as a whole. So we're really concerned about this strategy from government and whether it is going to be effective. And we know as an industry through many tranches of mitigations that have been put in place where the challenges are. So we're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods, people that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. And we need that support. That's the key thing at the moment, that the Chancellor needs to step up and consider what he can do amongst his options to support an industry that is very, very fragile at the moment.
Well, thank you very much for that. Now, a Met police officer has been charged for sending sexual messages to a child, believe it or not, facing Westminster Magistrates Court today. The charge relates to an allegation made in February 2021 following an investigation by the Met's own online child sexual abuse and exploitation command.
Yes, the Met have also been under fire, of course, for their recruitment process after a string of officers have been charged with serious offences, including PC David Carrick, who last month denied a string of 20 sexual offences against 4 different women, including rape, while Kevin Hurley is a former police officer who served as Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner between November 2012 and 2016. And Kevin previously served in the Metropolitan Police as well, reaching the rank of Detective Chief Superintendent. And pleased to say he's joining us now. Good morning. Is this sort of thing, do you think, a very, very rare occurrence, or is there actually something fundamental in the way the Met is run that allows this kind of thing to take place under the radar?
Well, there you go. Anyway, no, it is interesting, though, because, look, clearly there are some issues, although I think it's important as well, isn't it, to say that, look, in any industry, there are just some absolute out-and-out wrong-uns, aren't they? And you are going to, therefore, get some police officers who are also like that as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I suppose, and I do think that the Met, the police in general, is one of those professions where you can't afford to have incidents like this. And I know... I do believe we actually have Kevin Hurley back, so I can actually put this question to him. Morning. I don't know if you caught my question there. I was asking if this is an unfortunate, very rare occurrence, or there's something that's in the Met that's allowing this kind of thing to take place under the radar frequently.
No, there's nothing specific, one would say, that's allowing this to take place in the vet. I mean, the most important point to deal with here is that all police officers go through quite an extensive vetting process, mainly around have they had any criminal links in the past and so on, their financial status, are they vulnerable to blackmail? And it's more intensive than virtually most professions. However, when you've got a situation where someone is essentially a pervert who will use their position, whether or not they're a police officer, a nurse, a doctor, a journalist, to gain access to females or vulnerable people, some people will exploit that. I don't see this as a major issue for the Met, because there are 200,000 police officers or police staff in the UK. If we look at the numbers who are in fact being arrested or charged, they are tiny numbers compared to that number. And of course, it's the police who are in fact catching them. But it in no way excuses this. If I was to say there was something that does cause me concern about the police in general, is I think the leadership, and I won't even call them that, the leadership, I think the management, as they call themselves, have lost their way in setting the correct ethos, values and standards across the piece. And I think the steady cutback in leadership positions from sergeant right the way through to assistant chief constable commander has reduced levels of people giving coaching and guidance to young people who come in and are suddenly given free rein almost with the immense powers of a police officer. Now, are you hearing me or have you lost me?
No, we're hearing you. Yeah, we're very much hearing you. Yes, I think it's... Yeah, go on, carry on then.
I was going to say, I think the key point about policing when one looks at it across the piece is, in any liberal democracy, they jealously guard their powers over the citizens. However, they delegate a huge number of powers to the police. They can arrest you, break down your door, use force on you, take your children off you, inquire into your bank accounts, and so on. But that power is delegated to the lowest level. So if individual operators, and I mean by that constables and sergeants, have not got the correct ethos, we will from time to time see these aberrations that occur. But they occur in all walks of life. You know, if we looked at the number of people who've been murdered by people in the National Health Service, they are many, many, many times greater than people who've been murdered by police officers. And that's taking out Dr. Shipman. A lot of nurses have killed patients. So unfortunately, you will get nutcases. And in the case of these incidents in the police, disgusting perverts who will exploit their position. The one piece of comfort we take is that the Met internally have investigated this and, of course, have found this guy without anyone else discovering it. So I think we can rest assured that the specialist teams, specialist squads within all the police forces are pretty good at what they do. My concern is the drop-off in values and standards and leadership that people are seeing out on the police stations. I was always very hot when I was in that. In fact, I was notorious for insisting that people polish their shoes, press their trousers, wore their headgear, shaved, or if they were women, put their headgear, put their hair up and didn't wear long nails or nail varnish. Because if you start with first principles, you won't go far wrong from there.
Good stuff, Kevin. Thank you very much. Kevin Hurley there, of course, former police officer who served as Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner between 2012 and 2016.
Yes, thank you. Now, moving on, finishing on sport, England's hopes of saving the second Test match in the Ashes series against Australia are over. England are 192 all out and lost by 275 runs. They now trail the series 2-0, while England were attempting to bat out the day to save a draw, and Joss Butler and Ollie Robinson began to provide some resistance in the last hour, but it didn't prove to be enough.
No, it's a bit of a spanking, really. Well, former England bowler Stuart Meaker has been watching the action for us this morning. Stuart, thank you very much. And look, it's a bad day out, isn't it?
Well, a bad game out for England. I think it would have been incredible had they managed to hold on for the draw there. And there were so many moments where you just thought maybe they might just pull this off. And even when, right going into the last session, Joss Butler looking fairly set, how he managed to do it just clumsily ends up stepping on his own stumps. And of all the anticlimaxes, that was the way he ended up going. So it was sad to see him go. And then obviously in comes James Anderson, and him and Stuart Broad haven't got the greatest history of hanging around forever, or actually less so James Anderson because of that test in Cardiff, which we were all hoping they could potentially do again. But a valiant effort to get it as deep as they did and take it as deep as they did, but, you know, it would have just masked over the fact that England were thoroughly outplayed all the way throughout.
Well, that's it. I mean, even if we had clung on, it was still, 250-odd runs behind. So, I mean, it wasn't a fantastic performance necessarily. Psychologically, this England team now has to pick themselves up, dust themselves off. They've got 3 more games, haven't they? We could still win the series.
Of course. You know, being a positive person, there's still every chance. The only thing is it's a quick turnaround going into the Boxing Day test match, so any niggles and any pains obviously still hang around when you have a quick turnaround in test matches. And England did spend a fair amount of time in the field throughout this game, so they'll be a bit sort of jaded and a bit jagged going into that next test, and I think that they'll probably have to make a few changes to the bowling attack, particularly. I think going into Melbourne, they're going to need a little bit of extra pace. So hopefully Wood can come back in. Who that's for, we don't. You know, Stuart Broad had a good game. It might be Ollie Robinson, and they rotate him out. Even though I think he's bowled particularly well. Anderson was a bit down on pace, so they might want to give him a bit of a rest because he's coming back from injury. And then obviously the batting. You know, we've got to obviously have a little look at who might come in for that. We've got Crawley waiting in the wings and Josh Lawrence. So. We'll see. It's going to be tough, but you know we've got to make sure that we keep ourselves positive and that we still show some fight.
Absolutely. And just very quickly, who was your standout performer for England? Finishing on a positive. I know might be a bit of a hard ask this, but was there one person who stood out for you for England's man of the match, as it were?
England's man of the match. That's a difficult question. I don't know the answer. I think Wokes has been diligent throughout. He didn't bowl particularly amazingly well. He bowled all right. Yeah. You know, but a lot of rear guard action. I can't say there's anyone in particular. Joe Root, probably your best bet.
Fair enough. And of course, as a former cricketer as well, you'll be very good at catching. Hey, there he is. Fantastic. Good stuff. Stuart, thank you very much, Stuart Meeker there, who was watching the action for us this morning.
Yes. As you can see, I had lots to contribute to that conversation. But now on to our next story. Scotland is preparing to posthumously pardon nearly 4,000 people accused of witchcraft almost 300 years after the Witchcraft Acts were repealed. A members' bill in the Scottish Parliament calling for the pardon has secured the support of Nicola Sturgeon's administration.
Yes, well, between the 16th and 18th century, 2,600 witches were convicted and executed for witchcraft, often confessing under torture. So Claire Mitchell, QC of Witches of Scotland, has campaigned for a pardon, a government apology and an official monument after realising that the majority of statues in Edinburgh's Princes Street Gardens were almost entirely of men.
Yes, an SMSP, Natalie Don, who is behind the bill, said that righting this wrong can have an impact in challenging gendered and patriarchal attitudes in society. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is the same country now where they are going to be sending, like, male rapists to female prisons, things like that. And, you would have thought maybe if you really...
about a dozen over the last year and a half trans convicted sex offenders, I believe, in female prisons in Scotland.
But the real wrong that we need to rectify in Scottish society regarding women now is the pardoning of witches.
It's not very coherent, is it? But, I mean, I welcome this, certainly, because it was obviously ridiculous that people were witches, and they would be accused of being witches for relatively minor things.
Oh, yeah. But also it was the way that they used to do it sometimes, didn't they? Like, it would be things like, right, if we throw her off this hill, if she hits the ground and dies, then she's not a witch.
Yeah.
But if she flies, then she's a witch, And it's like, hang on a minute, well, what happens there? If we toss her into this river, right, if she drowns, then she's not a witch. But if she survives, she's a witch and we'll have to kill her again.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's go to some of your views now. GB views at gbnews.uk. The main thing on the agenda today, I suppose, is that COVID story, or Omicron is still with us. Highest COVID cases really over the last week or so.
Yes.
And, of course, those pictures of the Prime Minister having garden party / business meeting. Some people are saying, just stop talking about it, nobody cares. But let's see what people are saying.
Lawrence has been in touch. Thank you very much. Is anyone covering the online conversation between Fraser Nelson and the Sage modeller? Seems quite interesting. Yes, did quite a big thing on that at the start of the show, basically showing that Sage, it appears anyway, are only modelling for worst-case scenarios, not modelling at all for the notion that Omicron might be less deadly than Delta or what we currently know. That's obviously an issue for a lot of you in the inbox, because that could be the reason why we have increased restrictions. I love your show. Keep it up. This is from Yvonne. Thank you very much. Even as a lifelong Conservative, I feel that the government has lost any moral authority to enforce further restrictions or even another lockdown.
Yeah, lots of people will be feeling that at the moment. Well, keep all your thoughts coming into us on our email there. It's just gone, gbnews@gbnews.uk, and we will be back after the break with more of today's stories and plenty of your views. So here's the weather and a short break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's simply more of the same for many of us today. Cloudy again across large parts of the country. Something a little brighter in the east as the cloud lifts, and somewhat breezy in the southwest on the edge of this area of high pressure where the isobars are a little closer together. Now, this cold front, barely noticeable on the map there, will introduce some slightly drier air and higher cloud bases, I think, through the afternoon across parts of eastern Scotland into eastern England. And that will, although keeping things cloudy, turn things a little brighter into the afternoon, whilst low cloud sits further west, covering the hills, bringing a few spots of drizzle. There will be some broken cloud, West Wales, western parts of England, western Scotland. Some sunshine coming through here. A breezy afternoon to come in the far southwest. I'm feeling a little on the cold side, but temperatures not far from average for the time of year. Into the evening and overnight, as that higher cloud drifts west, there will be some breaks developing, especially in the west and through central parts. And where that happens, we'll see a touch of frost, temperatures dipping 0 to -2 Celsius. Otherwise, low single figures to start things off on Tuesday. Again, a lot of cloud covering the map, but I think a better chance through the day of some cloud breaks, especially for parts of Wales into central, western England, and where we see some cloud breaks, some decent sunny spells emerging. So for a lucky few, a sunny day, but for many, another cloudy day, and a bit colder again, temperatures of 4 to 6 Celsius, and still rather breezy towards the far southwest. Outbreaks of rain or drizzle affecting the far north and northwest of Scotland, staying fairly damp here through Tuesday. But for the vast majority of the UK, it is a dry day, albeit rather cloudy. That's set to change on Wednesday. Areas of rain move north across the country, turning to snow over northern hills later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki. We're here all the way through until midday with a show of all those big stories and big discussion topics.
Yes, make sure you get in touch as usual. GBviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll get to those throughout the show. But first, let's give you the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 11 o'clock. Ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the Cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, though, is urging for tightened rules to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours after a fall in bookings due to the Omicron variant. The operator of the Real Greek and Francomanca restaurant chains say rescue packages are needed regardless of whether further COVID measures are introduced. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Nighttime Industries Association, Michael Kill, told GB News the new restrictions are confusing, with businesses encouraged to stay open but customers told to stay away.
We're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods. People that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, but which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
The Labour Party is urging for greater support for businesses throughout the festive period. They're calling for the reintroduction of sick pay for employers who've tested positive with COVID-19 or have to self-isolate with symptoms.
What you don't want in a situation like this is businesses and workers having to calculate, should we do the right thing here or is there a cost to us? So it's really important that we've got a good sick pay system in place and one that is also helpful to the small businesses involved.
The Deputy Prime Minister has denied that Boris Johnson broke lockdown rules after a picture emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff enjoying cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released the photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and two others, with 16 other staff members nearby. Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning, but the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms to help maintain face-to-face teaching. In other news now, and in Australia, a sixth child has died following an incident in which a bouncy castle was lifted into the air by a sudden gust of wind. 11-year-old Chase Harrison died in hospital yesterday. Two other children remain in a critical condition and one is recovering at home following the incident in Tasmania on Thursday. Children at the Hillcrest Primary School in Devonport were celebrating the end of the school year. The Women's Tennis Association say an appearance on Sunday by Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai did not address its concerns about her well-being. Peng said that she'd never accused anyone of sexually assaulting her and that a social media post she shared last month has been misunderstood. Her well-being became a matter of concern after she posted on social media that a government official had sexually assaulted her. She was then absent for public view for nearly 3 weeks. In sport, England have lost the second Test match against Australia in Adelaide. Jos Buttler was the last batsman to play, but after 26 runs and for the first time in his career, he was out-hit wicket. Australia won by 275 runs and they led the Ashes series by 2-0. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 11:30. But right now, back to the point.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. And we've got a final hour full of today's big stories and lots of discussion as well on the issues you're talking about at home. So here's what's on the menu.
Yes, well, Health Secretary Sajid Javid says he can't rule out new COVID measures. No timetable has been set, but with Christmas just around the corner, lots of us are worried. Let us know if you've cancelled your plans to avoid being in isolation over Christmas. Want to hear about what you're going to get up to.
Yes, and The Guardian has released a photograph of the Prime Minister seemingly drinking and socialising with his wife and colleagues during the first national lockdown in May of last year. Number 10 says it was a work meeting. We'll be asking whether this new picture will hurt the Prime Minister or whether the damage has already been done.
Yes, let us know what you think about that as well. It's a bit split on this, actually, to be honest with you, the picture gate. So let us know, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Do you care about that picture that you can see on the screen right now?
Garden Gate even.
Garden Gate, hey. There we go. Anyway, right. And a survey has found that most teachers feel stressed, often or all of the time. All right, OK, anyway. We'll be talking about the stress faced by teachers and how it's affecting kids. Gosh, your heart bleeds, doesn't it?
Not very sympathetic, is he? We have all that coming up across the hour and much more as well. And get in touch, as usual, gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Just on that, look, I'm not being funny, but what about deliberately choosing a profession where you lock yourself in a room full of screaming children every single day made you think that maybe it wasn't going to be quite stressful? But anyway, we move away. We can tease all of that out later with our guest. Ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new measures to tackle the Omicron variant before Christmas. So according to The Times, around one-third of the Cabinet are reluctant to support new restrictions in the coming days, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor even, Rishi Sunak among them.
Yes, this comes after Health Secretary Sajid Javid refused to rule out further COVID restrictions for England as Omicron cases continue to soar. Nearly 83,000 COVID cases were reported yesterday after a week of record highs.
Speaking this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, was asked whether or not there will be further restrictions before Christmas. And Mr Raab replied by saying that evidence is being reviewed on an hour-by-hour basis, but the public should use common sense judgment on who they are mixing with.
Yes, while Dr Bharat Pankania is the Senior Clinical Lecturer at University of Exeter Medical School. He has over 20 years' experience in communicable disease control and infectious disease management and joins us now. Hey. Good morning, Dr Pankania. We had you on, I think, last week when we were still trying to get our heads around what Omicron meant for the country. A lot has changed since then. We know more. So just give us an update on what we do know as of now about this variant and whether we should be worried.
Yes, my pleasure. So if we look at the data, and what we want to do is not only look at the data of how many cases we have, but the rate. In other words, the steepness of the curve. And that steepness of the curve gives me cause for concern. In other words, there is a sharp upward tilt for the number of cases in a short period of time. Of course, we know that it may be a mild disease causing. On the other hand, it may not be. So that is the unknown. And there is always a lag period between the rising number of cases and hospitalizations that will follow in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The other concerning bits, which is coming out from an Imperial University study, is if it is just as much disease causing as the Delta variant, and I put the word if, then of course I would be even more concerned because we've got a rising tide of cases, and if they are going to be just as ill as Delta can make them, then we've got a problem on our hands. The other bit that we also know is that Omicron, by and large, bypasses many of the antibodies that we've produced with the vaccine. The antibodies are not rendered useless. They are still effective. It's just that we need more of them because it is bypassing a significant number in our collection of antibodies. And that's why we have the booster program to give us more of those antibodies to cancel out the Omicron vaccine escape.
That's fine. We were told, and I think people have forgotten this now, and it's important that we don't. When it was first announced about Omicron, really, in this country, we were told it would only be around 3 weeks or so before we knew a lot more about it, and we could therefore make some kind of informed decision about whether or not we needed to impose any more restrictions on our civil liberties and personal freedoms. Well, we're about 3 weeks on from that now, and surely the key indicator is going to be what we know definitively about whether or not this is more deadly and whether or not it should lead to more hospitalisations. Are we going to be, presumably what? We'll have to have a press conference on that later this week, will we?
So, with respect to how serious a disease-causing variant it is, we don't know. We don't know, but there are some warning signals coming from several places. But what we do know is giving us cause for caution and concern, which is what I referred to earlier, that steep rise in case numbers. So some precautionary measures, even though we may not know how much disease-causing it is, as a, what we would call it, forward-looking thing, we need to look at that steep rise in case and take some precautions.
I think the latest figures are that 12 people in Britain have sadly died with the Omicron variant so far. I just wanted to ask you, do we know, or is there a way of knowing whether these people died because they had this Omicron variant, or they died of other causes and they happened to have had this Omicron variant? Is there a way of knowing that? And shouldn't the government be giving us more details around this, as well as the demographic of these people? Because, you know, if these are, very older people, then, those deaths would also be inevitable, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
No, we've got every loss of life is a precious loss of life. If it is recorded sincerely and correctly as a death due to COVID, it is a death due to COVID, full stop. The other data that you can look at is also excess deaths.
Just quickly, sorry. No, I'm going to have to interrupt.
Let me just finish, please.
No, I don't. No. It's not the same, is it?
That we know, because it's only 12 deaths. We will know more in time.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, but we have to know now. Are these people already suffering from terminal cancer? Did they have weeks to live anyway? Are they in their 90s? And then has Omicron come and finished them off? Because if that's the case, that is relevant information. And it comes alongside the fact that today, or yesterday, it's emerged that it appears that SAGE is only modelling worst-case scenarios. They were not modelling for any idea that Omicron might be milder than Delta. And it just builds this picture, doesn't it, of why on earth are we being presented with all of the worst and all of the negatives? It is deeply relevant to all of our lives who these people are that have died, and what age they were and how ill they were before they got Omicron.
We will know in the fullness of time. Of course, people who are asked to advise will advise on the full range, the minimum and the maximum. And only a few minutes ago, I was asked this very question, and I answered as follows. So I'll answer it similar to you. I'm consistent and honest, which is I would always look at the median. What is likely to be the median, the measured outcome, neither the minimum nor the maximum. If you look at both extremes, you're not really using your head. So person in charge would say, yes, you've told me the best case scenario, the worst case scenario. I'm going to look at the most common expectation and then plan and work according to that. That's why, at the end of the day, we know scientists advise and ministers take the actions, and that's fair enough.
And just finally, before we let you go, of course, you are a professor of infectious disease management as well. So I want to ask you about how the government is managing this particular infectious disease and how they should manage future variants that will inevitably emerge, because what we're doing at the moment doesn't seem like a very good blueprint to be using every single time a new variant emerges. So what would you advise the government to do on that front?
That's a lovely question. There's 3 parts to this, and lovely opportunity to address this. So number 1, I feel that we need a coalition group in Parliament to deal with the pandemic rather than the governing party running with it, because Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, has got issues with his backbenchers giving him pressure, etc. And therefore, the decision-making is difficult. So first thing, I think we need a coalition to work on the pandemic, the great and the good of the country, working for the great and the good of the nation. The second bit is this. In any infectious disease outbreak, early, extensive, fast interventions wins the day. So at the first red flag that arises, you act hard and fast and early, and that way it will save the day. And that is what we should be doing. So what is the final bit that I want to say, and this is really, really important, is we are not well until everyone is well. So the richer nations who have commandeered all the vaccines ought not to have. There should be a formula for how we're going to share the vaccines globally. Because if we reduce case numbers globally at the same time, simultaneously, and then we suppress the emergence of variants. So we should have been doing that, which is immunize the world at the same time as immunizing ourselves.
Dr. Bharat, thank you very much. Dr. Bharat, can you there, of course, whizzing you through the very latest when it comes to the coronavirus stats and the figures. I cannot understand why we have the capacity, if someone else could explain this to me, because I couldn't seem to get an answer there, as to how it's possible to diagnose someone with the Omicron variant and then record that on a death certificate and tell us all about it, but you can't also just tell us what age they were and if they had any underlying. We need to know that in the fullness of time. Well, by the time we've known that, we'll already have been scared witless, won't we, by these amount of deaths, these amount of deaths, these amount of deaths. And then it will emerge in 6 months' time. Well, they were all in their 90s, or they were all... I'm not saying that these people deserve to die. Of course they don't. But they were all in their 90s. They had terminal cancer. They had something else.
And that wasn't what I was implying at all. I wasn't saying, well, if these people were old anyway, then it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It matters regardless of who it is, what age they are, etc. That doesn't need to necessarily be said. I think that's quite obvious. But I think it is relevant for us to understand, how this virus is playing out and who it's affecting and who it's basically killing. Because if it is a younger age profile, for example, then that is massively relevant.
Well,
that would
change. We'd be told about it, wouldn't we?
Well, yes. So I think that's important information, and as Dr. Bharat said, that's information that should emerge in time.
I just think it should emerge now. I don't see. Have a look at them. How old are they? Did they have any underlying conditions? That's all that takes. But anyway, right. Let's go into the inbox now. gbviews@gbnews.uk. The main reason we're in such an incredibly perilous situation is because of misguided information at the start of this pandemic. No name on that one. A lot of people get in touch about the photo, the Downing Street photo. This is from Linda. Couldn't care less about this photo. If that's a party, then it's one I wouldn't have wanted to attend. They all look miserable, but having a glass of wine and some cheese is a non-story.
Yeah, I think that's... I mean, I'm not sure a lot of people care about the party or whatever, the non-party, the business meeting per se. I think it's the hypocrisy that many people care about, or the vast majority of people care about, because at the time, we couldn't have done that. The public could not have done something like that. I think it was at the time, maximum one person from another household in your garden, no household mixing, etc. 2 meter social distancing guidelines. It's the fact that we wouldn't have been allowed to do that.
We wouldn't have done it. And I know some people whose lives were massively affected by this. There's one particular chap who went on a first date and he got to the park and he had to serenade her with a digital piano, and that relationship unfortunately fell through. And that is all down to Boris Johnson, of course. Keep getting in touch with all of that. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Yes, well, after the break, as we were speaking about earlier in my monologue, Quidditch leagues are changing the name of the sport in order to distance themselves from J.K. Rowling, who, of course, wrote Harry Potter, who invented Quidditch. They're trying to distance themselves from her gender-critical views. They say she's anti-trans. So why is she being erased from her own work? We'll get into that shortly. But first, the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's simply more of the same for many of us today. Cloudy again across large parts of the country. Something a little brighter in the east as the cloud lifts, and somewhat breezy in the southwest on the edge of this area of high pressure where the isobars are a little closer together. Now this cold front, barely noticeable on the map there, will introduce some slightly drier air and higher cloud bases, I think, through the afternoon across parts of eastern Scotland into eastern England. And that will, although keeping things cloudy, turn things a little brighter into the afternoon, whilst low cloud sits further west, covering the hills, bringing a few spots of drizzle. There will be some broken cloud, West Wales, western parts of England, western Scotland. Some sunshine coming through here. A breezy afternoon to come in the far southwest. And feeling a little on the cold side, but temperatures not far from average for the time of year. Into the evening and overnight, as that higher cloud drifts west, there will be some breaks developing, especially in the west and through central parts. And where that happens, we'll see a touch of frost, temperatures dipping 0 to -2 Celsius. Otherwise, low single figures to start things off on Tuesday. Again, a lot of cloud covering the map, but I think a better chance through the day of some cloud breaks, especially for parts of Wales into central western England, and where we see some cloud breaks, some decent sunny spells emerging. So for a lucky few, a sunny day, but for many, another cloudy day, and a bit colder again, temperatures of 4 to 6 Celsius, and still rather breezy towards the far southwest. Outbreaks of rain or drizzle affecting the far north and northwest of Scotland, staying fairly damp here through Tuesday. But for the vast majority of the UK, it is a dry day, albeit rather cloudy. That's set to change on Wednesday. Areas of rain move north across the country, turning to snow over northern hills later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Well, good morning. Pandemic-induced stress is affecting our teachers, with 7 in 10 feeling stressed frequently or all the time. The Educational Institute of Scotland survey also found that half of all teachers found their well-being at work was very poor or poor, citing staff shortages and under-preparedness for the pandemic in schools as reasons for feeling burnt out or disillusioned.
So 59% of teachers said they would not recommend teaching as a career to other people. Honestly, I find this a bit astonishing, really. Everyone's stressed, aren't they? We're all a bit stressed. The pandemic is a very stressful thing, and there are huge amounts of professions where there's a lot of stress. But anyway, Roger Layton is the Chief Executive of Partnership Learning and a former head teacher who joins us now. Roger, thank you very much. And, well, look, what's your view on this? Do you think that teachers are being a little bit oversensitive?
I certainly think that everyone is stressed. And teachers may be stressed, but almost all walks of life are stressed right now, aren't they? But I suppose if you did a survey of any profession at the moment, they're going to say the same thing. So I don't think it's teachers moaning unnecessarily and trying to say they're a special case. I think if they're asked, they're going to say they're stressed.
And in this particular survey, 59% said they wouldn't recommend teaching as a profession, which seems considerably high. I mean, they seem to not be very much enjoying the job they have, and that concerns me because they're teaching our children.
Yeah, that surprises me. I have to say it's not my experience on the ground talking to staff in schools. Obviously, teaching is a stressful profession, but most teachers actually do enjoy their daily work. They know that they're making a huge difference to children's lives, and actually they often do end up with children going into teaching. There are many teachers with, long family histories of working in schools.
Do you think part of it is to do with the fact classes are massively overcrowded at the moment, and that really sort of came to light, so to speak, the difficulty of all of that when COVID hit and you couldn't socially distance 30 kids in one room, for example. So that caused massive problems. I feel like overcrowded classrooms is a massive issue that needs resolving.
Actually, that's one I totally agree with. I've opened a number of new schools through our trust in the last 7 or 8 years. And one of the things we always struggled to do was get classrooms built to a decent size. We generally did, but if you look at the standard size of a British classroom, it's actually 54 square metres. And if you get 30 hulking grade 15 or 16-year-olds in there, you can't do anything other than sit them in rows facing the front and forget about social distancing. So I do think we made a big error in this country of trying to build schools on the cheap, and we do need bigger classrooms. Not an easy one to fix now, though, is it? You can't easily add 20 square metres on.
No, exactly. And this is only an issue that's only going to get more and more and more difficult because we have an increasing population, etc. And as with many areas of our infrastructure, we are not equipped necessarily to handle that. Look, some people watching this might go, hang on a minute, the average salary of a teaching job in London is just under 40 grand. This is just according to what I'm seeing here. Obviously, there's a lot of holidays by definition as well. Whether or not you're allowed to go anywhere during those is a different question altogether. Some people might say, well, they get luxuries in teaching that maybe you don't get in some other professions, especially with that holiday time. That's where you de-stress. That's where your time to de-stress is.
Yeah, and I broadly would agree with that. Look, like most jobs, there are pros and cons, aren't there? When you're actually doing the job of a teacher, it's incredibly stressful. You all remember being at school and the tyranny of those bells. And you can't decide, I'm feeling a little bit rough this morning. I'll take a bit of time over my coffee and then do the work later. You have to be on your top form from the moment you get into school, which for most people will be, no later than 8 o'clock o'clock in the morning to the time you leave, which for most teachers isn't going to be much before 5. So this idea that they have an easy life during the term because it maybe school finishes at 3:30 just isn't true. It's incredibly stressful, and most people, of course, are going to end up taking marking home and preparation and so on and so forth. But they do, on the other hand, as you say, have some decent holidays, and that is the time when they should be able to de-stress. I agree.
What do you make of some of the moves or desires at the moment that have been parroted, I suppose, by some of the unions, teaching unions, which is that we should be starting to look to educate children from home? And I wonder where you stood on that, because as far as I can see, that would be a massive issue for child welfare, child mental health, for example, as well. Look, potentially the quality of teaching, just by virtue of maybe classroom-based teaching, is possibly better, I would have thought. But then also it doesn't reinforce as well the idea of maybe kind of, the grades as well that teachers are giving out to kids, whether or not that's accurate and indeed fair on them, because then they get into Oxford and all of a sudden they're the worst performing person in the class, and that can have a problem with them. Look, what do you make of this idea by the unions to keep kids at home?
Well, to be fair to the unions, I don't think in general they've been arguing to keep kids at home. What they have been arguing for is to make schools as safe a workplace as possible. And that's their job, I suppose, as trade unions, isn't it? But I would say the profession as a whole is desperate to keep schools open, almost at any cost. Obviously, when it comes to, in the end, health and well-being, you have to take that very, very seriously. But we all know that there can be downsides to health and well-being, as you've just outlined, actually, for kids being not able to come into school. Mental health issues, safeguarding issues, kids getting into trouble out on the street and so on and so forth. We really are wanting to keep schools open. We're going to be trying our very, very best in the new year. However, we are going to face a potential problem with staffing. And I'm pleased to see the government today having a go encouraging retired teachers to come back as supply staff in the new year, because we need all hands on deck.
Well, Roger Layton, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Chief Executive of Partnership Learning and as well a former head teacher there.
Yes, well, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah. Indeed. Do you have more sympathy for teachers potentially than I do?
Yeah, I think I do. I think I have a lot more sympathy for a lot of professions and countries as well, France, than you do.
No, shut us out.
What were you like in school?
I was all right.
Should I ask?
I was all right. I was a bit cheeky, but I wasn't.
Were you? Did you ever get sent out or excluded?
Didn't get excluded. We used to have Saturday detentions, really? And I used to get those. But then because I played sport, I used to get off it because they'd let me play sport instead. But I was quite good at talking my way out of stuff. Yeah, really.
I can see that.
So there was a lot of things that we got. We had some very creative pranksters at our school. There was that classic one of them getting 3 sheep and painting them 1, 2, and 4, so that the school would spend the whole day looking for the 3rd sheep.
Was that a thing? That was not a thing.
And then there was one where someone ordered something like however many tons of topsoil for the school playing field, and a lorry turned up and ditched it all over the school playing field, and then obviously the driver went in and asked who was going to pay for it, and the school had no idea that their playing field was now under loads of there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot though who decided to who thought it would be funny to put a pig's heart in a vending machine.
What kind of school was this?
At Oxford.
Did anybody play Quidditch?
No one played Quidditch, right? No.
Because that's what we'll be talking about later.
We are going to be talking about Quidditch because Quidditch has cancelled J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Which is incredible, really.
Yes. Well, we'll be talking about all of that later, but first, let's bring you the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the Cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, is urging for tightened rules to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours after a fall in bookings due to Omicron. The operator of the Real Greek and Francomanca restaurant chains say rescue packages are needed regardless of whether new COVID measures are introduced. The government says support for businesses is kept under constant review. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID shortages in the next year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning, but the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across the primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms to try to maintain face-to-face teaching. And in sport, England have lost the second Test match against Australia in Adelaide. Jos Buttler was the last batsman to play, but after 26 runs, and for the first time in his career, he was out-hit wicket. Australia won by 275 runs, and they lead the Ashes series by 2-0. You are right up to date. I'll be back with all of today's top stories at 12 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, well, Harvard University have announced they will not require SAT or ACT scores for admission over the next 4 years. But critics have argued that these scores are racially and culturally biased, do not reflect the true ability of many students, but instead their ability to pay for tutoring. The university has decided to drop the score requirements so that those whose education was affected by the pandemic will not miss out on a place.
Yes, well, Inaya Falaran Iman, our social and cultural editor, is here to talk us through this. Thanks for joining us. Many people won't be familiar with this, obviously, because it's American. We don't really have SAT. We have SATs, I suppose, in primary school here. But just explain to us why Harvard have done this and why the critics of SATs are saying they're actually racially biased tests.
Yeah, so SATs are effectively, a scoring of examinations equivalent to what we have, international baccalaureate, A-levels. It's a way in which universities and institutions can determine what educational level and scores that the students have. And they originally paused the form of examination during the pandemic because many people were not able to get access to some of the testing centres, but now it seems that they are continuing it for another 4 years. And this is being welcomed by some groups who have said that it has been culturally and racially insensitive in the examination. But it's quite a curious thing to make that suggestion. I mean, all forms of examination and testing has its challenges, but they argue that, for example, wealthy people are able to train their young people or their students in order to actually get good grades. But we know that, for example, alternative things have their challenges also. So if you are looking at people's extracurricular activities, we know that wealthy students have much better access to extracurricular activities, sports and things that help them to basically gain those things that other poorer students have. If it's coursework, oftentimes the parents can help. So there's one thing when it comes to examination, that regardless of your background, regardless of your skills and networking and wealth, it's a level playing field. And so this idea that it is racially and culturally insensitive is a very bizarre accusation.
Yes, and it implies, I suppose, that sort of ethnic minority students need to have the bar lowered for them almost, doesn't it? And I'm aware that Harvard has actually been sued by a group of Asian American applicants for discrimination, basically, because they say you're holding us to a higher standard than other students. You're expecting us to have higher scores than everybody else. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an ongoing controversy in America where Asian American students have argued that they are being discriminated against when it comes to Ivy League universities, in particular the elite level universities, because they tend to, on average, score higher. So on the one hand, they'll have the scoring, but when it comes to the subjective elements, such as the interview, then they will often be judged lower for personal characteristics. And it is argued by some of these Asian Americans that they are trying to reduce the number of Asian Americans going to these Ivy Leagues, or they will be massively overrepresented. But it tells you the kind of contradictions of a lot of the identity narrative that often ethnic minority groups such as Jewish Americans or Asian Americans that do higher, they are not considered the ones that are being culturally victimised and often are classed as closer to being white or having privileges than the black or Latino Americans.
Yeah.
And it always exposes the contradictions when you categorise people in such a narrow way.
How do you actually see this being resolved then, if at all?
Well, I think testing, in my personal view, I think testing is one of the best ways for students, regardless of your economic, social circumstances. That is something that if you are successful when it comes to the examination, then that is a good indicator of your ability to do well. But it does seem that, particularly in America, but in many institutions, even here in the UK, we are seeing this move towards lowering standards. There was a recent development in many universities where, when it comes to essays, there will no longer be marking people based off of their grammar. And it does seem that this ability to hold people to higher expectations across educational institutions is being replaced by almost protecting them from being challenged, preventing them from actually having, being challenged. And I think that's very unfortunate for poorer students.
I think it's unfortunate as well for a lot of children, actually, and young adults, because when they do get, let's say they get, just 4 A stars or whatever, their teachers are basically giving those 4 A stars A level or whatever the metric is now, and they do get into a Harvard or they do get into an Oxbridge, and they get there, and then not always, but some of the time, they'll get a massive shock because they'll realise that their grades were inflated, and they'll really struggle to actually exist in that environment, and that's bad for their mental health.
That's a very, very important point. Actually, we do see that there is a higher dropout rate in Ivy League universities for many African American students, and some people have argued that it is because, for example, the grade inflation that you're mentioning, but also if you come from a chaotic home, if you come from a chaotic background, schools are often the only place where you get discipline, structure and high expectations, and that could be really a lifesaver for many of these young people. So if we are now eroding those things, then you are now finding there is no space for those kids to get discipline and structure, which will stand them in really good stead as they grow older.
Well, thank you so much for talking us through that and making it a lot clearer in IFLR and Iman. There are social and cultural editor. I think it's quite unfortunate as well because when you lower the standard or lower the bar for certain groups of students, whether it's ethnic minority students, working class students, I think people do start assuming every ethnic minority or working class person is there because they've had the bar lowered for them and not there on their own merit. And this has happened to me, actually, when somebody assumed I'd gotten into the university I'd gotten into through some diversity scheme. And not through my own merit, and they were just it was just an innocent person, a friend of mine, who just assumed that was just an assumption. That was an assumption that they'd made. They were like, oh, didn't you get in on one of those?
Why would you say that?
I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way. I was not impressed by that assumption, but that's what happens when...
Have they been seen since?
Well, I mean, that's a story for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was, of course, Anaya. Thank you very much. Right, well, moving away, Labour is calling for urgent action on sick pay in a bid to help 5.3 million employees at risk of losing work due to the new wave of the Omicron variant. Their plan to combat COVID-induced absences includes reintroducing statutory sick pay rebate for small businesses, the extension of the scheme to all workers, including the self-employed, and increasing sick pay.
Yes, earlier we spoke to MP Pat McFadden, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, on whether or not the Chancellor has let people down with regards to sick pay.
The Chancellor made in my opinion, an unwise choice last week by going to California in the middle of all this. He went there 2 days after the Prime Minister had said we were facing a new tidal wave of COVID infections. We then had the Chief Medical Officer advising us to deprioritise social contact. And that's inevitably, both of those things have inevitably had an effect on businesses' ability to trade. The Chief Medical Officer is just doing his job, by the way. I have no criticism of his advice. But all of these things have produced a wave of cancellations of Christmas bookings for business. And December is very often the month where businesses make a lot of their profits for the year. So we've suggested a very practical measure today, which would be of some help. It may not be all that's needed, but one thing the government could do immediately is restore the rebate that was in place until September of this year, by the way, on the small businesses being able to reclaim the cost of sick pay if somebody has to take time off work because they're isolating or they are tested positive for COVID. What you don't want in a situation like this is businesses and workers having to calculate, should we do the right thing here or is there a cost to us? So it's really important that we've got a good sick pay system in place and one that is also helpful to the small businesses involved. So that's one measure the government could announce. But overall, over and above that, I hope the Treasury are currently now focused on a package of support that meets the reality of what businesses are facing. We're not in lockdown, but it would be totally disingenuous to pretend it's business as usual at the moment. On the repayment of some of the business loans, why do we want to start insisting that businesses repay when they may not be able to make any money? We could be more flexible about that. In terms of the length of time that measures should be in place, we've seen the same projections on this wave as I have from the Chief Medical Officer. It is increasing rapidly at the moment. It's expected, this talk of the doubling rate, it's expected to go up very sharply, but that also might mean that it lasts less time over a period of weeks or months than previous waves. So we may not have to have measures in place for very long, but we do need some help for businesses now where clearly, as we've agreed, they're not trading under business as usual, anything but.
Well, that was MP Pat McFadden, who's a Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, talking about whether the Chancellor should do more to support businesses. This is, of course, after Labour have called for urgent action on sick pay in a bid to help the 5.3 million employees at risk of losing work due to the new wave of Omicron.
Well, look, let's just go into the inbox, actually, I think. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Lots of you getting in touch with about Dr. Bharat Pankania, who we had earlier on the show, who we were asking him about the latest COVID figures, of course, how scared we should be of Omicron and how likely lockdown figures are, etc., lockdown restrictions are, sorry. And also specifically about the idea now that it looks as though, and if you are just joining us, there was a really, really interesting, I thought, little exchange between Fraser Nelson at the Spectator and Graham Medley, who's basically kind of in charge of Sage, really. And it was revealed that actually the way that they model their predictions is based around worst-case scenario stuff, and not actually bothering to do it for if it's less severe. And I think this is really fascinating stuff. And lots of people saying that, look, actually, we need to stop doing this. Leslie said, no, this is unacceptable now. It's going to be impacting our lives, these decisions, and they need to be honest with us. I don't know if it's a question of honesty. I think it's a question more of perspective, right? Just give us both sides of that coin, right? You don't need to go full frontal terror.
Yeah, I think there's what's emerged throughout this pandemic is that there's been too much. I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but the science and the raw COVID data has taken priority over other important aspects like that cost-benefit analysis of locking the social costs as well. And I feel like the raw science and the raw models have really just taken centre stage. Yes, there's absolutely a place for those, but the idea that those should determine the entirety of government policy in regards to COVID is questionable.
It's questionable to say the least. Yeah. Right, OK, so this is story of the day for me. 2 Quidditch leagues, you heard, are changing the name of their Harry Potter-inspired sport in an effort to distance themselves from J.K. Rowling and her, quote, transphobic views. Well, Alex Burnett, one of the adapters of real-life Quidditch, says that the sport needs its own space without limits on its growth potential, and changing the name is crucial to achieving that.
Yes, well, J.K. Rowling's supposed anti-trans comments, that's what these leagues have accused her of, anti-trans, includes one such as, this is what she says, "I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female." That's what J.K. Rowling has said.
Fair enough.
And she's been much criticised after an opinion piece she published, in which she criticised terms such as people who menstruate or people with vulvas, for example, instead of using women. And I believe we can actually show you what do we have pictures of what Quidditch looks like? Because people will be like, you can't, because they fly, don't they, in the Harry Potter? On the brooms, right? So this is what Quidditch looks like when played, obviously, in real life, not in...
Yeah, and it is,
So they-
obviously,
so-
it's just, you've got sports like ice hockey, you've got sports like rugby, you've got all of those things. And this, of course, is nothing like that. Anyway...
So they have to, by the way, they have to keep the broom between their legs, the fake broom, the stick, in between their legs at all times. That's one of the crucial rules of the game. Obviously, to mimic a broom, which is what they use in the Harry Potter series, to fly around whilst playing Quidditch.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, Miranda Yardley is a human rights activist and joins us now. Thank you very much, Miranda. Great to have you on the show. Have you ever thought about dabbling in a spot of Quidditch?
Oh, no, but I dabble in black magic all the time.
There's actually something strangely believable about that. No, go on. So, look, what do you think about this? The fact that Quidditch is now cancelling J.K. Rowling, the lady who came up with the sport or thing, whatever it is.
What an utterly horrendous and crass betrayal of everything that J.K. Rowling has done to give these people these ideas which she has allowed them to use freely and to do what they want with. It's absolutely laughable, and it's if you look at what J.K. Rowling has said, she said absolutely nothing that is transphobic, unless you think that the whole concept of biological sex and women are real things and are human beings. Unless these are unutterable words, then she has said absolutely nothing that is transphobic.
And she's received a lot of awful hate, vitriol, even death threats sent to her house. Most recently, she had two so-called trans activists, so-called equality rights activists, turn up to her house, post her address online, and it prompted lots of death threats to her house again. I mean, what should be done about these sorts of people? Because there seems to be so many of them in society who want to bully women who speak up in defence of biological women.
Oh, well, I think J.K. Rowling is far too charitable to come up with a spell to deal with these nasty people who hang around a house, get photographed, and attempt to intimidate her. Because this is what it is. It is a process of intimidation, and it is designed to it's designed to frighten her. And I think that, well, what can we do about it? I mean, we live in a liberal democracy. People should be allowed to express themselves freely, but at which point does this just become harassment? I think we need to ask and have a decent answer to that question. If we look at what's happened at, I think it's the appeal courts today, we've had a judgment handed down regarding these things that the police have been using, called the recording of non-crime hate incidents, which are a positively Stalinist idea. This idea that without any due legal process, you can have this black mark against your name for a non-crime hate incident. And the police seem to be focused on dealing with ideas like this to what they think is protecting minorities who consider themselves to be more oppressed than any other minority. And they seem to be less aware with protecting or are less focused on protecting the democratic rights of the rest of us, never mind standing for women.
This is it. I suppose, do you believe that women are being erased now, in a sense?
Well, that's an interesting question. Certainly the language which women are have been able to use to describe themselves and their bodies is being very, very heavily policed, and if not erased, and taken out of the common lexicon. If you look at the NHS website, for example, the female-specific complaints are described in a very sex-neutral manner. If you look at complaints specific to males, like prostate cancer, it's not the same. It's pitched directly at the sex to which this all belongs, and a lot of these horrible, meaningless neologisms like cis are being used to describe something that ultimately can only be defined in terms of stereotypes. Sorry, I've kind of gone off on a tangent there.
Great, it's good.
But
It's really interesting to get your point, and as well, like I think you touched on the one of the things there about cis as well. These words now that are pigeonholing people more than they are doing to unite us, aren't they? But Miranda, thank you very, very much. Always an absolute pleasure. Hopefully speak to you again very soon. Miranda Yardley there, a human rights activist, just discussing the fact that J.K. Rowling has been cancelled by Quidditch.
Yes, which is the weirdest sentence ever, isn't it, really?
It is,
I mean, and cisgender, this term cisgender, I actually find, I'm not offended by much, but I find the idea that I need a new word to describe the fact that I was born a woman and I am a woman. I mean,
and that's almost actually a hateful thing as well. Like, because of that now, you completely, well, hang on a minute, I'm not sure that could be correct. But anyway, that's it from us here at To The Point today. So make sure that you don't go away, because up next, Tom Harwood is back for more, ladies and gentlemen. He's irrepressible, he's insatiable. He'll be doing the briefing with you very shortly.
Yes, see you soon. Here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's simply more of the same for many of us today. Cloudy again across large parts of the country. Something a little brighter in the east as the cloud lifts, and somewhat breezy in the southwest on the edge of this area of high pressure where the isobars are a little closer together. Now, this cold front, barely noticeable on the map there, will introduce some slightly drier air and higher cloud bases, I think, through the afternoon across parts of eastern Scotland into eastern England. And that will, although keeping things cloudy, turn things a little brighter into the afternoon, whilst low cloud sits further west, covering the hills, bringing a few spots of drizzle. There will be some broken cloud, West Wales, western parts of England, western Scotland. Some sunshine coming through here. A breezy afternoon to come in the far southwest. And feeling a little on the cold side, but temperatures not far from average for the time of year. Into the evening and overnight, as that higher cloud drifts west, there will be some breaks developing, especially in the west and through central parts. And where that happens, we'll see a touch of frost, temperatures dipping 0 to -2 Celsius. Otherwise, low single figures to start things off on Tuesday. Again, a lot of cloud covering the map, but I think a better chance through the day of some cloud breaks, especially for parts of Wales into central, western England, and where we see some cloud breaks, some decent sunny spells emerging. So for a lucky few, a sunny day, but for many, another cloudy day, and a bit colder again, temperatures of 4 to 6 Celsius, and still rather breezy towards the far southwest. Outbreaks of rain or drizzle affecting the far north and northwest of Scotland, staying fairly damp here through Tuesday. But for the vast majority of the UK, it is a dry day, albeit rather cloudy. That's set to change on Wednesday. Areas of rain move north across the country, turning to snow over northern hills later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.